this country has a number of very deep-rooted economic problems. The legacy of the financial crisis and the mistakes that were made in the public finances by our Labour predecessors, that is a mess that we have to clear up. The pressures from the Eurozone more recently, the high inflation. So, of course, all of those things mean that growth has been much slower than we would have liked over the last 2 or 3 years.
Have the austerity measures played a part in slower growth?
Well, what I'd say to you is that the judgment you've got to make is, going back to 2010, if we just left things as they were, not put in place a plan for austerity, I think the impact on our economy would have been much, much worse. You know, you can look at other countries around the world and see what happened to countries that didn't have a plan. So I think the question is, did putting in place the plan we've put in place and that we are seeing through, which does involve some difficult choices, is that giving our economy a stronger foundation for growth? And I think the answer to that question is yes.
But that wasn't the question I asked.
Well,
what I asked was, are you saying that the austerity measures have played no part in the flatlining?
I'm saying that if we hadn't gone for the austerity programme that we did, the deficit reduction, the spending reductions and so on, then our economy would have been in a much worse position, because after all, one of the benefits of that is the lower interest rates.
But that's not the question I'm asking, Mr. Alexander.
I think it is the way you've got to look at this is not has any particular policy had an effect in that way, but is the choice that we made the right one for the economy? And I think it is, because it's keeping interest rates low, it's helping people with the cost of their mortgages, it's helping businesses with the cost of their finance. Of course, look, when you make decisions that are about reducing people's benefits, having to put up VAT, all those things have an effect on the economy. But I think the net effect of having chosen a path of credibility and building confidence in Britain's ability to pay its way is the right answer for the British economy.
Now, you blame the Eurozone crisis for one reason for the lower growth than expected. You did that again now. Commodity prices have also been blamed, but they affect every economy in the West. Why has the UK's recovery been weaker than almost every other major economy?
Well, if you look around Europe, actually, you'll see a number of countries that are in a worse position than us and have been over a more sustained period of time. But look, I think one of the biggest mistakes that was made in the run-up to the crisis, which has a bigger effect on this country now, is to do with the failures of regulation of our financial sector, the failures in our banking system. The weight of those mistakes and the weight of our broken banking system is holding the British economy back more than other countries, because our banking system is larger as a share of our economy than in other countries.
But if you look at the 2 years coming out of the financial crisis, our economy was on a similar path to recovery as most of the G20 countries, including Germany and the US. It only began to fall behind when you took over the public finances in 2010 and began the austerity.
Well, what you had in that period, of course, was the people scrutinising Britain's public finances, the people from whom we are still having to borrow tens of billions of pounds every single year, questioning the credibility of the previous government's economic strategy. That meant that at the time we came into office, our long-term interest rates were at the same level as countries like Spain and Italy. And of course, we've seen the different path that those countries have taken compared to our own since then. That's why I believe That's why I believe that when we came in 2010, we've made the right decisions. And look, in a sense, what we inherited from the previous government was not just a mess in the public finances, it was a competitiveness deficit too, and that's why we are investing in infrastructure, investing in skills, deregulating, reforming the tax systems to support businesses, all things that in the medium term will lift the growth potential of this economy. Because, you know, I believe in the end that the previous Labour government was far too focused on financial services in the City of London. The only way we're going to get back to sustainable growth is by having a more balanced approach to the economy than that.
But since the coalition came to office, the economy's grown by only 0.6% in that 2.5 years. You based your spending cuts on official projections that the economy would have grown by almost 6% by now. It's grown by 0.6. You were a factor of 10 out. Now, if you had known then what you know now, that we'd only have grown by 0.6, would you still have agreed to cut so much?
I think I would, yeah. I mean, in fact, it's the projections from the Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent body that we set up.
Which was wrong.
You may have seen a couple of weeks ago that they published an evaluation of why their forecast had gone wrong in a very open and transparent way. They focused the attention on the problems in the Eurozone, on the high commodity prices that you mentioned, on the problems in our financial system. They didn't place great weight on austerity as having a negative effect. And I think if we hadn't taken the decisions we did back in 2010, the dangers for our economy, we were on the brink then, under pressure in in the global financial system would have been much, much worse for our country. So in the end, I think the judgment we made when we started out was the right one, and it's a judgment we've got to stick to.
So you would still have cut even though even if you had known the economy was going to flatline for 2.5 years, you would still have gone ahead with all the cuts and tax increases.
Well, look, of course, you have to base your judgments on the forecasts you have at the time. So
I'm asking even if you'd known what the truth was.
You can ask all sorts of hypothetical questions. We could have been given any set of numbers, but the basic challenge that we faced back in 2010 was a country that didn't have a plan to deal with its financial problems, that didn't have a plan to reform its economy, to lift its growth potential. We've put in place both of those things, and as a result, I think there is greater confidence and greater credibility about the United Kingdom than would have been otherwise.
Well, let's look what was said at the time of the June 2010 budget when the austerity programme came in. Let's just see it. You see it up here. What it says here is that the wider effects of fiscal consolidation, that's your austerity programme, will tend to boost demand growth. That hasn't happened. Could improve the underlying performance of the economy. Productivity is actually falling now. And could even be sufficiently strong to outweigh the negative effects. Well, it wasn't, because the economy hasn't grown. So you can't still stand by that statement, can you?
Well, I would go back to what I said before. If you look at the OBR themselves, who are responsible for these forecasts, we've quite rightly taken these forecasts out of the hands of politicians so that they're done independently. They published their own evaluation of why the forecasts were out, and they've cited the problems in the Eurozone, which have an effect on business confidence here, as well as on our exports. They've focused on high commodity prices. Those are all things that are stronger headwinds, if you like, than we'd expected, where things have been more difficult than we expected. And we knew when we came into office they were going to be difficult. But I don't think that means that the path we've set is wrong. After all, you can look at other countries that haven't had plans in place to deal with their financial problems. And, you know, when we came in...
Who has grown more slowly than us?
When we came in, the United Kingdom had one of the largest budget deficits in the world. If you look at countries in southern Europe, for example, they're growing a great deal more slowly.
Which major economy has grown more slowly than us?
Well, as I say, if you look at countries in southern Europe like Italy, like Spain, significant economies in a European
in the past 2 years,
in a European context.
More slowly.
Well, if you look at the forecast for those countries, they are a great deal slower than us. But look, in a sense, the judgment we have to make is, given the circumstances that we face, when Britain's economic credibility was on the line, when there was no plan in place, did we make the right judgments? And my answer to that question is yes, I think we did.
I know that, and you've answered, although I've not asked you that question, you've answered it 3 times this morning, which is probably a record, even for the Sunday Politics. Look at this chart.
But it is the central point.
No, I've got that point, all right. Look at this chart here, because what this shows is that the yellow, the 23%, it shows that less than a quarter of the cuts to current spending, have yet to be introduced. I mean, 77% of your cuts have still to be done. Now, will the effect of the 77% that we've still to go through, what effect will that have on the economy? Will it be positive, negative, or neutral?
I have to say I don't recognise these figures because we've
current spending,
because we've set out
Institute of Fiscal Studies.
Well, let me explain my perspective on this. We set out in our spending review plans to reduce spending progressively year on year over 4 years in this Parliament. We are halfway through delivering those plans. By the end of this year, I think about 48% of the spending cuts will have been delivered, as well as various tax increases that you know about. We're currently entering into a process of setting out plans for the first year of the next Parliament. And look, part of what we have to do is to make sure that we make those reductions in a way that minimises the impact on the economy. That's why, for example...
So what would they be? Positive, negative, or neutral?
Let me just carry on with what I was saying, if I may. That's why, for example, when you look at capital spending, which does have a big impact on the economy, and where we are spending a bit more than the previous government set out, we've been through a process to spend that money on the things that have the biggest impact on the economy.
All right.
So, for example, we are investing more in this country's transport infrastructure over these 4 years than our predecessors managed. That's one of the highest value things you can do for the economy.
I'm glad you're coming on to exactly what I want to talk about, Mr. Alexander. And this is because the Lib Dems are particularly fond of state investment, of what is called euphemistically infrastructure spending to boost growth. Nick Clegg told in September 2011, he said he promised a gear shift in government to unblock the system, get the money out the door. Everybody cheered. How much extra infrastructure spending has gone out the door in the 13 months since he said that?
I don't know the precise answer to that question. What I'd say to you is two things. Firstly, in our spending review, we increased the amount of capital spending by £2 billion a year compared to the plan set out by Labour. In the autumn statement last year, we allocated an extra £5 billion to capital investment. But look, getting our infrastructure going is not just about the public sector. So, for example, we've announced the UK Guarantee Scheme. We've had more than 50 expressions of interest from private sector infrastructure projects where a government guarantee could help get them going. Tomorrow morning I'm meeting with 30 or 40 chief executives of major infrastructure providers because we are sitting down with the industry to work with them to make sure we can deliver our infrastructure plans faster and more effectively than have been set out.
Well, I'm glad you've said that because I want to show you what the Director General of the CBI has said. He said it only last month. He says business is looking for action. This is on what you're talking about. And we haven't seen it yet. We're critical of the execution and delivery. The pace needs to pick up.
I totally agree with that. And that's why I asked John Cridland, after he said that, to come along to the Infrastructure Committee in Government, which I chair. This is exactly the same message that from the Treasury I'm giving to every other department in Government. He came and he explained his perspective. Actually, what he said, and what he said publicly too, was he very much supports the fact that infrastructure is a big focus for this government. As you say, it's a big focus for the Liberal Democrats. It's vitally important to lifting the growth potential of this country.
If it's so
we've got big, we've done big things. We're investing more in railways, for example, since the Victorian times.
Let's look at the overall picture, though, since you make such a big deal of this. Let's look at these figures up here. This is public sector net investment from the Office of Budget Responsibility. Every year, you're cutting in public sector net investment, infrastructure spending. You start at 38 billion. By 2015, you'll be down to 22 billion. Every year, it falls.
And if you look at the plans that we inherited from the previous government, they were even sharper than that. So actually what we've done, look, Andrew, I can't conjure money up out of thin air. We have the biggest deficit we've had in our country's history. We're trying to deal with those problems by getting better value for that money, by using government guarantees to offer guarantees to up to £50 billion of projects funded in the private sector, not the public sector, to bring that investment forward. We're giving through our renewable obligation certificates, for example, more certainty to energy investors in the private sector to bring their infrastructure investment forward. So there's lots that you can do to get infrastructure going, as well as better targeting.
And you mentioned the guarantee scheme.
Yes.
But you're guaranteeing the borrowing of private companies in infrastructure investment. How is that different from the government doing the borrowing itself, which it could do more cheaply, other than that it's an accountancy sleight of hand? It doesn't end up on the government's balance sheet, but it's the same thing.
Well, it's different because these are projects that are private sector projects that are being brought forward by the private sector, but because we are seeing difficult conditions in the funding markets for many of the reasons that you gave earlier, particularly around the Eurozone crisis and the lack of confidence, the big risk is not that those projects can't be funded eventually or in 3 or 4 years' time, but that because of the difficult conditions they'll be delayed. By offering a guarantee, we can bring those projects forward, make sure they happen right now over the next 12 months, and as a result get more activity in our economy happening now. I think that's a wise use of the strength of this country's balance sheet that we've built up because we've taken tough economic decisions.
Let me briefly move on to the autumn statement, and I forget if you just be quite concise. They're quite specific questions. The Chancellor's ruled out a mansion tax at the party conference. Is that idea now dead in the water for the rest of the Parliament?
I still believe that a mansion tax is the right thing.
I know that, but is it dead in the water as an
Andrew,
idea?
I'm not going to enter into autumn statement negotiations through the medium of this programme. Nick Clegg, George Osborne, the Prime Minister and myself sit down together in the Quad over the next few weeks to discuss the different ideas on the table. I'm not going to have those negotiations.
But could there be a mansion tax in the autumn statement?
In public.
Could there be?
What I'd say to you is that making sure that the wealthiest in this country, the people who have the most, contribute the most in the next round of deficit reduction is a central principle for Liberal Democrats, and we will not bring forward a package that doesn't meet that objective.
Well, when you were last on the show, you said that you thought tax avoidance was, quote, morally repugnant. So
I still believe that, absolutely.
Right, so Starbucks, which has paid $8 million in tax on $3 billion of profits, is it morally repugnant?
Well, as a Treasury Minister, I'm not going to get into commenting on the affairs of individual taxpayers. I don't have specific information about any taxpayer. I don't have your information or information about any company.
Apple's paid almost nothing. eBay, Facebook, Google, Amazon. I mean, if you're serious about tax avoidance, don't you have to do something about them?
Absolutely, and we are.
Really?
We are taking steps across the range of tax avoidance and tax evasion. on individuals, on wealthy individuals, on businesses. We're
Amazon,
investing,
no UK company tax on a £3 billion turnover?
Look, we are investing more money in HMRC precisely so they have the resources to go after the tax dodgers, to make sure their affairs are in order.
Yeah.
And whether you're a big company, whether you're a wealthy individual, whether you're someone who thinks you can get away with not playing the rules, the message from this government is very, very clear. We're coming to get you to make sure you do pay your fair share of tax.
And that includes these companies I named?
That includes anybody who is not playing by the tax rules of this country.
Let me finish up on Scotland, a subject close to both of our hearts.
Yes, indeed.
Do you still think it wise, in view of the serious questions of trust raised by your party and others about Alex Salmond last week in Scotland, do you think it wise to allow him to set the question for the referendum?
Well, I'm very glad that we've got out of the process questions. We're now going to have a referendum to settle this question.
But we haven't settled the question yet.
Once and for all. One of the things we secured as part of the referendum package was the role of the Electoral Commission in the Scottish referendum in exactly the same way that it plays in UK referendums. Well, I think there are more immediate questions for Alex Salmond to answer. I think he has to answer the question why it was that he allowed thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money to be invested in paying lawyers to prepare a court case to prevent him releasing legal advice that it turned out didn't exist on Scotland's EU membership. I think his accounting officer has questions to answer too. After all, there are rules about public finances in this country, which means that you shouldn't just waste taxpayers' money on politicians' vanity projects. This is one of the most extraordinary episodes we've seen so far.
But you're happy he can set the question?
I think in the end, what the Scottish people want is information. They want the facts before them. They want to understand what this would really mean for the Scottish economy. And I think if Mr Salmond tries to fiddle the question, the Scottish people will come down on him like a ton of bricks.
We shall see. Diane